Odyssey, Chapter 1. The Fall of Troy and the Journey begins. In the ashes of Troy, where walls once soared, golden and proud, the city now lay broken, a graveyard of hopes and heroes. The 10-year struggle was over, the Greeks victorious at last, their ships waiting like shadows upon the blackened shore. But for the greatest Greek of all, Odysseus, of Ithaca, the war's end would mark only the beginning of a far longer, crueler trial. The Odyssey home. Odysseus moved through the ruins with the weight of destiny upon him. Among the whispers of the survivors, those who mourned their daughters, sons, and kings, no one knew the price that victory would soon demand. Odysseus stared at the horizon, the distant blue where the gods swirled their plans. He longed for home. Rocky Ithaca, his patient wife Penelope, and his son Telemachus, who'd grown from a toddler into a young man, while his father fought and bled on distant soil. The Greeks celebrated through the night, but unrest hid beneath the triumph. Ancient rivalries flared, old wounds festered. Agamemnon, the king of kings, spoke of feasts and sacrifices. Yet, hidden by the flames, a priest of Troy cursed the Greeks, calling upon Poseidon, Earthshaker, to avenge his city's fall. None heard his words above the revelry, none but the gods, whose pride ran deeper than any mortal hatred. Dawn painted blood on the sky. Odysseus assembled his weary men. Their ships, clustered like birds on a barren branch, stood ready. Around him gathered warriors who had watched friends die and dreams turn to dust. Wise Eurylochus, fearless Perimedes, loyal Polites, each hoped for swift winds homeward. The fleet set sail. Their sails opened like the beating of desperate wings, catching the wind's fickle favor. For a moment, under the wide Aegean, all seemed possible. Soldiers watched the coast of Troy shrink and vanish. Home, after 10 years. Hope flickered in every eye. But peace was short-lived. As the sun set, the air soured. Clouds thickened, twisting into monstrous shapes. The sea below grew dark and restless, churning like the hearts of the angry gods. Suddenly, a thunderclap split the night, and fierce winds lashed the ships, crippling rudders and snapping masts. Lightning danced across the waves, no natural storm, but the rage of Poseidon himself. Hold fast, Odysseus shouted, tying himself to the mast as the world twisted with chaos. Men screamed over the roaring gale. Ship after ship was swept apart, scattered like leaves in a hurricane. In the maelstrom, Odysseus glimpsed the face of Athena, when tossed and sorrowful. The favor she had once shown him in Troy would now be his only shield. When the storm finally ebbed, Odysseus saw dawn break over a world transformed. Only a handful of ships remained, battered and lost on unfamiliar waters. Gone were the landmarks of home. The air smelled of unknown flowers and fear. His men, haggard and wounded, peered out at the strange, lush coastlines that awaited them. He gathered his crew. We have survived the wrath of gods and mortals. Now, every day must be fought for. We are brothers, bound by destiny. Our strength is not in numbers, but in our wit, in our faith, and in the hope of Ithaca. Follow me, and I promise you, our story is not yet ended. Yet even Odysseus, shrewd and clever, could not see the full web being woven. On Mount Olympus, the gods watched, each plotting their amusement or their revenge. Poseidon nursed his grudge in the deep, determined to hound Odysseus across every sea. Athena, torn by love for her mortal champion, pleaded for mercy to Zeus himself. And far away, Penelope waited, weaving and unraveling her tapestry. her heart torn between hope and despair. Thus began the long, impossible Odyssey of monsters and enchantments, temptation and terror, and a hero who would not yield to fate. The story of a man in search of home, whose cunning would be tested by every horror the gods could conjure. The war was over. For Odysseus and his men, the true journey had only just begun. Chapter 2. The Island of the Lotus-Eaters. The battered Greek fleet drifted aimlessly beneath a sullen sky, sails limp in the muted sunrise. Each man nursed his wound, some visible, some gouged deep in memory. The taste of home already felt like a fading dream. Odysseus stood at the prow, his mind working, scanning the horizon for salvation or new perils. On the third day, a gentle breeze rose and carried the ships toward a distant, low-lying coast, shrouded in silver mist. The air suddenly grew sweet and intoxicating. Lush green shorelines emerged as if conjured by a god's hand, swaying palms, flowers bright as jewels, and a shimmering haze that glimmered gold, even as it burned the eyes. It was a paradise painted atop the ever-present ache for home. Odysseus ordered, the anchor dropped, and sent 3 men-loyal pilots, brave Eurylochus and quick-tongued Elpenor, to scout the island. Be wary, he cautioned. Sometimes, the greatest danger wears a welcoming face. The trio vanished into the thick, perfumed growth. Hours passed. The sun drifted higher. No word returned. Troubled, Odysseus himself stepped ashore, gathering a few chosen men and ordering the rest to stay near the ships. They trekked through soft grass under drowsy sunlight, lulled by the distant sound of laughter. Flowers, strange and beautiful, brushed their ankles. At the island's heart, they spotted their lost crewmates reclining beneath a broad tree. The men were in a daze, their clothes rumpled, their faces glazed with lazy smiles. Nearby stood the island's inhabitants, the Lotus-Eaters, a gentle folk with dark, dreamy eyes, offering handfuls of golden blossoms. Friends, Polites called to the other Greeks, waving languidly. You must taste this wondrous fruit. Come, forget sorrow, forget longing. Here, there is only peace. Elpenor, eyes vacant and soft, echoed the invitation. There no pain, no memories, no home to mourn. A cold dread struck Odysseus, for he saw something terrible masked behind bliss. These men had lost their hunger for home, their purpose, their very selves. In the cloying sweetness of lotus, they had found oblivion, and in oblivion they were lost. Fiercely, Odysseus shook Eurylochus by the shoulders. Wake up, he ordered. Do you not remember Ithaca? Your families, the lives we must return to. Eurylochus stared back, pupils unfocused, lips mumbling a song of forgetfulness. Realizing the danger, Odysseus rallied his team. Drag them to the ships, if you must carry them. We will leave this place, now. A frantic scuffle broke out as the drugged sailors protested and the Lotus-Eaters pleaded gently for them to stay. But the will of Odysseus was iron. One by one, his men hauled their entranced brothers, screaming, weeping, drifting between sleep and waking back to the coastline, down to the waiting decks. Some cursed him as a tyrant for tearing them from bliss. Others wept silently, their limbs heavy with regret. We are not beasts who live only for this moment, Odysseus thundered, straining with effort as he wrestled a drooping Elpenor on board. We are men, sons of Greece, sworn to families and fathers, fated for struggles and glory. We were not born to forget, but to strive. We can mourn, but we must return. With tremendous force of will, Odysseus shoved the last of the dazed men into the belly of the largest ship and forced everyone aboard. He ordered all ropes loosened and shouted for oars. Reluctant rowers, half awake and weeping lotus-tinged tears, pulled the ships away from the enchanted shore. Behind them, the gentle lotus-eaters watched in silence, neither cursing nor blessing. Their faded forms soon merged with the mist. As distance increased, color returned to the drugged sailors' faces, their eyes flashing with pain but also with memory. As the island faded from sight, Odysseus stood on the deck, broad-shouldered and resolute, drenched in the sweat of a struggle, not with monsters, but with the soul's great temptations. The sea was again their world, cold, restless, honest. That night, his men huddled around the prow, haunted not by gods or monsters, but by the echo of forgetfulness. Around them, the hungry winds howled, and the prow pointed west. Odysseus, gazing at the moonlit water, murmured to himself, "A hero's path is never easy. The world offers comfort that leads only to oblivion. We must choose memory, pain, and hope, never surrendering who we are, and that for which we sail." Unknown to them, from the misty far side of the island, a great shadow watched the departing ships. A figure, not quite man, with a single blazing eye. The greatest of their trials was not comfort, but what would come next. Somewhere in the darkness loomed nightmares that no gentle flower could soften. Chapter 3: The Cyclops' Lair. Beneath a restless sky, Odysseus and his men rowed west until at last the sun revealed jagged rocks jutting from the sea. The air grew sharp and briny, and the coastline loomed ahead, green hills shaggy with wild goats and shrouded in mystery. The men were hungry and wary, yet a strange curiosity flickered, even as dread lingered in their bones. Odysseus called a council upon the deck. "I see smoke on that distant plain," he said. "We need food and fresh water. Let's beach here and bring offerings, gifts of friendship and caution. For though we are guests, we know not the hearts of those who dwell here." They anchored in a sheltered cove and set out, swords sheathed, hearts pounding beneath battered armor. They trekked up the hillsides, following sheep paths through thickets, until the grass gave way to a wide plain. High above, strange, looming caves yawned from the cliffs like the mouths of sleeping giants. With practiced eyes, Odysseus spied a cave bigger than a temple, its entrance barred by a massive slab of stone. Above and around, flocks of sheep and goats grazed peacefully. Waiting until dusk, Odysseus chose 12 of his bravest men and led them into the cavern, bringing with them a wineskin of potent, ruby-red wine, gifted to him by a grateful priest on their way from Troy. Inside the cave, the men found baskets of cheese and jars of milk, and pens crammed with lambs. Driven by hunger, the men feasted quietly, but Odysseus, ever cautious, called halt. "This wealth belongs to someone. We should wait, offer gifts, and hope for hospitality. For we Greeks honor the laws of Zeus, protector of guests." The sun vanished, and thunder rumbled. Suddenly, heavy footfalls shook the earth outside. A monstrous shadow filled the entrance, and a giant stooped to enter, blocking the last slivers of daylight. One eye, round and blazing like a foundry's forge, stared from the creature's massive brow. The Cyclops, Polyphemus, son of Poseidon, returned, driving his sheep before him. He wedged the boulder shut behind him and turned, his giant nose sniffing the air. "Strangers," he rumbled, "what are you doing in my cave? Thieves or lost sailors?" Odysseus stepped forward, swallowing his fear. "We are Greeks, blown far from home by storm and fate. We beg hospitality and offer you this fine wine, great lord of this land. Without a word, Polyphemus seized 2 men, dashed out their brains upon the stone, and devoured them whole. Horror froze the survivors as the Cyclops slumped, sated, and drifted off to sleep among the flocks. Through the cold, dark watches of the night, Odysseus' mind raced. They could not kill the monster, he alone could move the boulder that barred their escape. Morning brought new terror as Polyphemus made breakfast of 2 more men before leaving with his herds, easily rolling the stone aside and sealing it again on his way out. Odysseus called his men together. "We'll not die as nameless victims. Tonight, we blind the monster and save ourselves." As the sun sank, the men sharpened a giant olive wood stake in the embers. When Polyphemus returned, they offered him the potent wine. The Cyclops guzzled it down, slurring, "What's your name, little morsel?" Odysseus, cunning gleaming in his eyes, replied, "My name is Nobody." As the giant collapsed in a stupor, Odysseus and his men hoisted the smoldering stake and with all their strength, drove it deep into the Cyclops' single eye. The monster shrieked, thrashing blindly and rolling aside the boulder, calling for help, but when the neighboring Cyclopes asked who was hurting him, Polyphemus howled, "Nobody. Nobody is killing me." With dawn, battered and blind, Polyphemus pulled aside the stone once more to let out his sheep. Odysseus tied his men beneath the bellies of the fattest rams. Clinging breathlessly, they slipped out as the Cyclops blindly felt the backs of each beast, searching for escapees. Outside, they broke into a dead run, sprinting for the ship. But hubris bested Odysseus. From the safety of the waves, he couldn't help but jeer. "If any man asks, 'Who blinded you?' tell him it was Odysseus of Ithaca." The giant, shaking with rage, hurled boulders at the retreating ships and called down a dreadful curse, vowing that Poseidon should bar Odysseus' journey home. A hush fell as the coastline sank behind them, and the curse of the sea god hung over the battered fleet. For the first time, fear wrestled with Hope Peachman, knowing that of all monsters, the gods themselves now hunted them. Odysseus gazed westward, determined, the spark of wit unextinguished. The journey would grow darker, its price ever dearer. Chapter 4. The Island of Aeolus. The sea was restless beneath Odysseus' battered fleet. Though the Cyclops' curse still echoed in the men's ears, the sight of a green, floating island ahead brought new hope. The air above this strange, drifting land shimmered gold, as if the sun itself had fallen asleep upon its hills. White towers twisted skyward, spinning gently on invisible winds. "This is the home of Aeolus, the keeper of the winds," Odysseus told his weary men. "Be respectful. Aeolus is a friend to travelers, but the gods are fickle. We must honor him as only Greeks know how." As they set foot on the ever-spinning island, servants in flowing rainbow cloaks greeted them joyfully. The halls of Aeolus were alive with music, laughter, and feasting, a rare gift after so many days of terror. Odysseus was led through glittering corridors to the king himself, garlanded with feathers and crowned by an ever-moving swirl of air. A guest of destiny, Aeolus boomed, his voice carrying the power of storms. "Odysseus of Ithaca, I know your story. The gods watch you with envy and hate in equal measure. But in my house, you have only my good will. Tell me your tale." That night, before blazing fires with the wind sighing softly above, Odysseus recounted all: the siege of Troy, the storm's wrath, the enchantment of the lotus, the horror of the Cyclops, and the relentless pursuit of Poseidon. Aeolus listened with wonder and pity, clapping his hands in delight at Odysseus' cunning hand. shaking his head at the cruelty of men and gods alike. "I cannot change the will of the mighty Poseidon," Aeolus said at last. "But let me help with what is mine." From the heart of his kingdom, he brought forth a great leather sack, bound with shining silver cords. "Here within I have imprisoned all the winds that would hinder your journey. Only the fair west wind is free, swift, and gentle. Guard this gift well, and you will see Ithaca in 10 days' time." Odysseus bowed low, promising to care for the precious bag. The men feasted 3 days and nights, their wounds healing, laughter returning if only for a moment. On the 4th morning, Odysseus' heart soared as blue water sparkled ahead. Their ships, driven by the steady west wind, streaked toward home. For 9 days and nights, Odysseus watched the stars, his eyes wet with longing as memories of Ithaca flooded his heart. Penelope working at her loom, Telemachus chasing goats upon the rocky hills, the scent of olive groves warmed by the sun. "Sleep, at last," claimed the weary king. For the first time since leaving Troy, Odysseus dared to dream not of monsters, but of the gentle hands of home. He did not see his men's fearful murmurs, their hungry, jealous glances at the mysterious leather bag lashed to the mast. Surely their luck must be locked inside gold, riches, perhaps even secrets of the gods. At dusk on the 10th day, just as Ithaca's rocky hills flickered on the horizon, curiosity burned away restraint. Led by Eurylochus, the men untied the shining cords. A thunderous roar erupted as all the wild winds, long imprisoned, burst free. They spun the ships in dizzying circles, lashed the mast with invisible whips, and hurled the fleet far from home back across the endless sea. The calm morning after the storm found Odysseus battered and furious. Ithaca, once again, no more than a memory. His men hung their heads in shame as the floating island of Aeolus drifted once more into view. Desperation gripped them all. Odysseus climbed once more to the dazzling palace, winds tugging at his tunic. Aeolus welcomed him warmly at first, but upon hearing the story, the Wind King's face darkened, pity replaced by dread. "No, Odysseus. Surely the gods are set against you. I cannot help one so cursed." He turned away, and the halls of wind were suddenly cold, the laughter gone. With no choice but to press on, Odysseus led his men from Aeolus' isle, the precious gift lost, spirits shattered. Across the wind-lashed waves, the fleet pressed on, each man wrestling with regret. Hunger gnawed, hope faded, but the stubborn fire of longing burned in Odysseus' heart. The sun set blood-red upon the sea. As darkness fell, new fears haunted the sailors, a sense that whenever hope flickered, it would be snatched away even more cruelly than before. Ahead, a gloomy land loomed in the haze, no song, or welcome, or laughter, only the promise of shadows and giants, lost kingdoms where monsters feasted. The Odyssey was not just a journey across oceans, but through the heart of suffering and the strength to endure. Odysseus stood at the bow, scanning the unkind horizon, and whispered into the wind, "Ithaca, I will find you, if I must walk upon the waves themselves." Chapter 5. The Lastrygonians, Giants and Cannibals. Bleak and battered, Odysseus' fleet sailed on through chill, misted seas. The men, exhausted and angry after Aeolus' banishment, clung to haunted dreams of home, their hopes battered by wind and fate. Each dawn brought a new uncertainty, another land unknown, another test of mortal will against the whim of gods. One afternoon, ragged cliffs rose ahead, crowned by strange, towering stone shapes. Odysseus' men, always hungry, always hopeful, spotted what looked like a harborer, narrow bay sheltered by rocks. They maneuvered their ships inside, grateful for the calm, and for once, the silence. High above, the cliffs reached up like the fingers of a sleeping giant. Odysseus alone kept his ship outside the harbor's mouth, tying it to a rock, his instincts prickling with unease. "Scout the land," he ordered. "Don't wander. Keep your swords close and your wits closer." 3 men volunteered, leaping out and making for a narrow road winding up between sheer cliffs. The air was strangely still, thick with the scent of pine and something sour underneath. As they climbed, they glimpsed makeshift huts, huge animal bones strewn across the hills, and smoke twisting from a tower atop the cliffs. In one hut, they found a young girl tall as a mast, with arms thick as oars drawing water from a spring. "Do you know this place?" the scouts asked. The girl smiled, exposing teeth too large for any peaceful meal. "This is Telepylos, land of the Lastrygonians. My father is king. He trusts guests. Go. He will greet you himself." The scouts followed the girl, not noticing the hungry look in her eyes. She led them to a vast, stone house, its doors wide as barn gates. Within sat Antifate's giant, monstrous, his eyes burning red with hunger. Before the scouts could react, the king seized one, smashed his bones, and drank his blood in a single gulp. The other 2, screaming, fled for their lives down the hill, the king's shouts echoing across the cliffs. At the harbor, those screams turned to chaos. From the hills, a horde of giants poured forth, male and female, all monstrous, wielding boulders and club-like tree trunks. Odysseus, seeing the horror, desperately cut his ship's moorings and called to his men, "Back to the boats, row." But the other ships, trapped inside the narrow bay, could not escape. Before the Greeks could fully react, the giants attacked, snatching up men as easily as a child grabs olives, hurling boulders from the heights so that splintered timbers and broken bodies filled the water. The sea churned red. Odysseus' voice, desperate and hoarse, rang out above the carnage. "Row, by all the gods!" His own men, in terror, bent to the oars with every ounce of strength they had left. Against all hope, Odysseus' single ship shot forward. They pulled hard, teeth gritted, hearts pounding, muscles afire. Boulders splashed in their wake, the hungry roar of the giants chasing them out to the open sea. At last, they broke free, wind and waves carrying them mercifully beyond the reach of monsters. As silence and salty air returned, the cost was clear. Of Odysseus' once mighty fleet, only his own ship survived. 12 ships had entered the harbor. 11 never left. His men, those who remained, trembled and wept, for friends devoured, for the wreckage of hope, for the unending cruelty of their fate. Many doubted their captain. Many cursed the day they followed Odysseus to Troy. But their leader's resolve shaken, yet steelier remained, unyielding. "We are fewer, but we are the cunning and the lucky. The gods whittle our strength, but we will not let fear decide our fate. There is no returning to Troy, nor can we drift forever. With courage and wit, we will see Ithaca again, or we will perish as Greek steadfast to the end." That night, they drifted, the stars pale with dew above, and the black waves swallowing each sob, each prayer. The sound of their rowing, the only proof that mortal hearts still burned brighter than the darkness around them. On the far horizon, a green shape shimmered, a new island, rare and lovely as a dream. This time, Odysseus would trust no promise of peace, but even hope, bruised and battered, carried them forward. The journey over deadly waves was far from finished. Ahead, greater magic and greater their numbers were too few to withstand another blow. Yet the immortal tapestry of fate kept winding, drawing them inexorably onward. Chapter 6: Circe's Enchantment. With only one ship remaining, Odysseus and his handful of survivors sailed on, their souls scarred by the Lastrygonians' slaughter. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. Salt settled like ash on their skin, yet still none dared turn back. Ithaca was more than just a home, now it was their final hope of meaning, of making sense of everything the gods had forced them to endure. Days bled into nights. At last, out of the violet dusk, the island of Ia emerged lush and mysterious, thick with dark trees and curling mists. Colors seemed sharper here, the very air humming with the promise that not all magic brings death. Emboldened but wary, Odysseus ordered the ship ashore and sent half his men, led by his loyal friend Eurylochus, to explore the depths of the silent forest. The explorers followed a singing so enchanting that it seemed a dream. At the center of the woods, among flowering clearings, they found a magnificent palace framed by marble columns. Wild animals, lions, and wolves lounged in the grass, but their eyes were calm, almost human, and they greeted the strangers with gentle tails and paws. From within the palace, the singing swelled, and a woman appeared. She was breathtaking, eyes gleaming like polished amber, hair flowing in a silken stream down her back. This was Circe, witch-daughter of the god Helios, her power ancient as the sun. "Strangers, you look weary," Circe purred, her voice sweet as honeyed fruit. "Come, eat and drink, and forget your troubles." Inside her radiant hall, the table gleamed with golden platters, fine breads, rosy meats, and wine that sparkled with unseen fire. Eurylochus hesitated, but his men fell upon the feast. As they ate, Circe whispered strange words, tracing her wand through the perfumed air. In the blink of an eye, each of the men shuddered, shrankened where proud Greeks had sat, now oinked fat pigs with human eyes. Eurylochus alone, who had sensed doom, leaped from his seat and fled back to Odysseus, wild with fear. Breathless and pale, Eurylochus staggered onto the beach. "She is a goddess, Captain. She has turned our brothers into swine." The crew recoiled in terror, some cursing the sea, others falling to their knees. But not Odysseus. His eyes flashed with both terror and grim resolve. Drawing his sword, he started toward the forest alone, until a flash of silver caught his gaze. Out of the shadows stepped Hermes, the messenger of the gods, his swift feet barely making a mark on the earth. "You venture into danger," Hermes warned, his voice both gentle and urgent. "Circe is powerful, her spells sweet and deadly. But take this, moly, a sacred herb, black as night with a flower white as milk. Its magic will shield you when hers would destroy." He handed Odysseus the precious sprig, then was gone, as suddenly as he'd appeared. Armed with courage and Hermes's gift, Odysseus strode into Circe's palace. The witch welcomed him with a beguiling smile, pressing a jeweled cup into his hands. Odysseus drank the wine's dreamlike fire slid down his throat, but the herb held strong. Circe raised her wand, uttered her spell, and nothing happened. Odysseus leaped to his feet, sword drawn, its tip at Circe's pale neck. "You will undo your poisons," he commanded, "and restore my menor, your bloodstains, this golden floor." Amazement and respect dawned in Circe's eyes. She smiled not with cruelty, but with admiration. "You are no ordinary man, Odysseus of Ithaca. You alone resist my magic. Stay, be my equal, and I will be your ally. I will return your men to form and shelter you in my halls." With a wave of her wand, the pigs transformed back into Greeks, dazed but whole, their shame forgotten in wonder. Dinner became a true celebration. Song and laughter filled the halls that night. At last Odysseus felt hope, not as an illusion, but as something possible, a home, not of punishment, but of peace. The days passed sweetly. Circe offered rest, healing their wounds, easing their hearts with gentle words and soft beds. For a year they stayed, lulled by the comforts of her magic, drifting between longing and forgetfulness. But as time moved on, the memory of Ithaca wife, son, and kingdom gnawed at Odysseus. He went to Circe, humble yet determined. "I thank you for mercy and kindness, but I cannot stay. My heart is not mine to keep. I must return home or lose myself forever." Circe nodded, sadness and wisdom mingling in her gaze. "So be it, but your path will be harder still. You must cross the threshold of the dead and seek the prophet Tiresias. Only he can guide you the rest of the way." With hearts, once again, heavy but resolute, Odysseus and his men readied their ship, carrying not just caution, but the memory of unexpected kindness and the promise of greater trials beyond. Chapter 7: The Land of the Dead. Beneath Circe's walls, the island slept in dawn mists. Odysseus prepared his men for a voyage, stranger than any before across the boundary between living and dead. Circe's magic had soothed pain and hunger, but now her words weighed on their hearts. "You must journey to the land where shadows dwell, to consult the prophet Tiresias. Only he can reveal the path home." Nerves taut, Odysseus and his crew rowed their lone ship through uncharted waters. The sun's warmth faded as gray fog thickened. A cold wind without scent pulled them onward, unnerving all. The living world seemed to recede, replaced by an endless plain of mournful waves. At last, the black coast of Cimmeria appeared, jagged as broken teeth. No birds sang, nor surf broke here. Silence seemed to consume every hope. The men drew the ship onto the shore and followed their captain to a low, stony field where dark spirits were said to gather. There, as Circe commanded, Odysseus drew his sword and dug a trench. Into it he poured honey and sweet wine, barley meal, and the blood of a black ram, the ancient offerings to the dead. Kneeling, he prayed for mercy, heart pounding in awe and dread. Almost at once, the shadows boiled up from the mist. The souls of the departed shimmered and wailed, their voices swirling with longing for the warmth of life. Odysseus' men huddled close, clutching each other in fear as their leader stood guard over the blood, sword flashing. One by one, the spirits approached, but Odysseus was told to allow only Tiresias to drink. Then came a presence that stopped his breath. His mother Anticlea, who had died during his long absence. Odysseus' voice broke as he called to her, but she could only weep and fade, waiting for her turn at the edge of the trench. At last, Tiresias approached tall and wise, dead but undiminished. His eyes were dark wells, seeing deeper than any living man. He drank his fill and then spoke, his voice echoing like thunder beneath the earth. "Odysseus, man of pain, the god who shakes the earth, has set your path with trials. Beware the cattle of Helios, for destruction waits if you cross the line. When at last you reach Ithaca, suitors will devour your house. You must cleanse your home with blood and wisdom, or never know peace. Only then, far inland, must you journey again till you find men who do not know the sea, and offer sacrifice to Poseidon. Then, and only then, shall you rest." Odysseus nodded, the words burning into memory. Yet Tiresias was not alone. Other souls pressed forward, desperate for a moment of remembrance. His mother drank from the trench and embraced her son not with arms, but with tears and words. She told him of Penelope's sorrow and Telemachus' lonely struggle to grow into a man with no father by his side. "Remember us, Odysseus. Let not your name be lost among the shades. Return for Ithaca, for honor, for love." Now came others. Agamemnon, king among Greeks, betrayed and murdered by his wife and her lover just upon returning home. His warning was bitter. "Trust no one, Odysseus, not even your own house. Beware when you finally stand upon Ithaca's shores." Achilles, the greatest hero of the Greeks, shimmered at the grave's edge. Odysseus praised him, but Achilles' reply was heavy with truth. "Better to be a living slave than a king among shadows. Cherish every heartbeat, hero. Life, not glory, is the greatest prize." Others followed the familiar faces of old friends and fallen comrades, each with regrets and untold stories. The weight of their sorrow threatened to drown Odysseus in grief, but the captain's resolve held firm. He promised them songs, memory, and sacrifice upon his return to the living world. As dawn pressed weakly on the horizon, Odysseus bade farewell to the dead. He drove back the gathering spirits, covered the trench, and beckoned his trembling crew back to the ship. The wind, now keening, filled the sail with purpose, as if Hades himself wished them gone. As they sailed away from the haunted shore, each man felt colder, as though the world itself was heavier. But their captain was different, soaked in the pain and wisdom of the dead, yet burning with newfound determination. For now, Odysseus knew with certainty that the road home would be dark, but he was armed with prophecy, love, and the courage that only the memory of loss can bring. Chapter 8. The Sirens' Song. The shadows of the underworld faded behind them, but their chill lingered in every heart. On Circe's island, Odysseus and his men washed the dread from their souls at her hearth, feasting and listening to Circe's wisdom. Yet beyond the taste of bread and honey, a new weight pressed upon Odysseus, the doom and hope foretold by Tiresias. One evening, as the crimson sunset painted the sea with fire, Circe drew Odysseus aside. Her gaze was deep, her tone grave. "There are places darker than the land of the dead, and dangers that do not wear the face of monsters. Listen well, Odysseus. Ahead lies the strait of the Sirens, whose song no man can resist. If you hear their voices, you will forget all else, your home, your wife, your purpose, and your ship will shatter on their hidden rocks." She pressed beeswax into his palm. "Plug the ears of your men. Let them hear nothing as you sail. But if you must listen, have yourself bound to the mast. Command your followers, no matter how you beg or plead, they must not set you free until danger is past." The next morning, the ship slid away from IA sails taut in the brisk wind. The men labored in silence, eyes narrowed, faces drawn and grim. Odysseus explained the threat in hushed tones. "No hero slays a siren. Their power is the seduction of the mind. We conquer only by holding true to ourselves and to each other." When the waves grew eerily still, and the coastline warped into impossible shapes, he melted the beeswax and filled the ears of every sailor. Then he stepped to the mast, and had his strongest men lash him tight with coiled ropes, arms pinned and shoulders straining. As they entered the Sirens' domain, A sudden hush fell, the crash of surf faded, the wind slackened, even the seabirds vanished. And then, faint at first, Odysseus heard it, a music strange and unearthly, strung with longing, woven with the memory of every hope, every love, every victory. The voices rose and curled among the crests. Odysseus, glory of the Greeks, come closer, come near. Never has any hero passed by without drinking deep of our song. The melodies painted visions in his mind, of Penelope's arms, of Ithaca's hills, of departed friends singing by firesides under new moons. The longing grew so strong that Odysseus strained against the ropes, crying out to his men. His voice was pleading, desperate, promising riches and favor. If only they would release him from his bonds. The men, remembering their orders, rowed harder, sweat dripping from their brows, ignoring their captain's pain. Odysseus' cries turned to shouts, then to sobs and curses as the song threatened to shatter him. Still, the Sirens wove their spell, their voices ever sweeter, promising forbidden knowledge. The secret of Troy, the embrace of fame that would last beyond death itself. But tied fast, Odysseus could only listen, powerless to obey or escape. His eyes rolled with wild longing. The crew rowed, their ears stopped, and their faces hard as marble, until at last the music ebbed away, the island of the Sirens shrinking into a dot behind them, their calls nothing more than a memory on the wind. As soon as the sea's voice returned, the crew hurried to unbind their captain. Odysseus collapsed on the deck, sweat cold upon his brow, heart thundering, tears in his eyes. He looked at his men, not only as followers, but as true saviors, those who had carried him past temptation, even when he could not save himself. We are tested, not only by monsters and storms, Odysseus said, his voice hoarse, but by the sweet lies that promise what we most desire. Remember, sometimes to survive is simply to resist, not to give in. The ship sailed onward, battered but unbroken, the crew now knit tighter by shared trial. Their reward was not gold, but the knowledge that they could trust neither gods nor their own, wanting only each other. Yet the sea did not rest. Dark cliffs gathered ahead, black and menacing, clouds swirling at their peaks. Circe's warning echoed once more. Beyond the Sirens lie, even greater, Scylla and Charybdis, the twin perils of the sea. Hold fast, Odysseus, for the road home is not yet won. But for this one precious day, the Greeks rowed in silence, pride flickering within their tired hearts, for they had bested a danger that could not be met with sword or shield. Chapter 9. Scylla and Charybdis, the monsters of the deep. The sun had barely dried the sweat from Odysseus's brow when the sea grew restless again, churning with whispering waves and hungry winds. The memory of the Sirens' spell pressed heavy in every man's mind, but new dread slithered beneath the surface. Circe's warning rang in Odysseus' ears as he stood at the prow, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Steel your heart, Odysseus. Beyond the Sirens, you'll face twin terrors, Charybdis, the living whirlpool, and Scylla, whose 6 heads snatch sailors from the deck. To choose is agony. You cannot pass between unscathed. Choose loss, then speed onward. Do not fight what cannot be fought. From the crow's nest, a lookout cried out. Ahead, the channel narrowed between towering cliffs, the seascape bent in a grimace of stone. To port, a cavern overflowed with swirling black water. Charybdis, daughter of Poseidon, her gigantic maw sucking and spitting the sea itself, shaking the world with her thirst. Each time she drank, the foam frothed and the current spun a deadly circle, threatening to swallow ship and soul whole. To starboard, upon a shadowed ledge, the rock bristled with monstrous growth. Scylla, once a maiden, now a sea hag, transformed by jealousy and dark magic, nestled in her den. Her 6 snapping heads, each with a triple row of fangs, lurked above the passage. No sword, no shield could defeat her. Her arms, long as the ship's mast, snatched what prey dared draw near. Odysseus called his men close, masking his fear with steady words. "My friends, listen. Death waits both ways. Row as close as you dare to the cliff keep well away from Charybdis whirlpool. If fate demands a sacrifice, let it be swift. Look only forward, and do not stop, no matter what you hear behind you." He alone, forewarned by Circe, girded himself with armor and took up 2 spears, praying to every god whose name he knew. No shield could save the doomed, but he would not abandon hope nor duty. At Odysseus' order, the men rowed as never before. Sweat gleamed on their faces, eyes wild and wide. To their left, the sea bulged and spun. The ship pulled dangerously close to Charybdis' gaping maw. Then, with a deafening roar, the whirlpool sucked down a mountain of seawater, the ship trembling at the edge of destruction. The crew held their breath, arms aching, as the ship skirted the outer spray of Charybdis. But in sailing close to one peril, they neared the other. Overhead, Scylla's rocky perch loomed dark and silent. Suddenly, the sky split, down lunged the 6 ghastly heads, their jaws clamping with irresistible force. 6 men each, plucked from the deck in a flash, were snatched up, screaming, their swords flailing helplessly in the air. Bones crunched as Scylla devoured her prey, and blood spattered the sea. Odysseus watched, helpless and raging, unable to save a single soul, his heart breaking for his companions stolen away. He shouted for the survivors to keep rowing faster, for their sakes row, even as the cries of the eaten echoed in his ears. The ship shot through the strait, battered but not lost. Splinters and sorrow littered the deck. Charybdis' whirlpool roared and swirled behind them, empty-handed for this pass. Scylla's shadows shrank into memory. Only 6 men were gone, but for the survivors, every face was a brother. Every loss a wound deeper than any sword would ever cut. The wind caught their torn sail, pushing them onward. No stories of gold or glory could fill the new hollows in their hearts. Instead, Odysseus saw a haunted wisdom in their eyes. They wept quietly, mourning not only the lost, but the cruel knowledge that, sometimes, to survive, you must choose who does not. As night descended and the cliffs faded into distance, Odysseus kept watch by the rail. He whispered the names of the dead to the stars, and swore, once again, that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Yet, no rest awaited the battered Greeks. Hunger gnawed, the sea stretched ever onward, and a new, sun-drenched island appeared on the dusky horizon. The men eyed it with longing and dread, their grief still raw. Odysseus closed his eyes, Circe's and Tiresias's warnings echoing in every heartbeat. Beware the sun gods, cattle harm them not, or doom will find you all. But hunger and despair are a mighty foe, and the will of mortals often breaks where gods only bend. Chapter 10. The Cattle of the Sun God. The survivors of Scylla's fury, still haunted by the memory of lost friends, sailed on battered and hollow-eyed. The sea shimmered endlessly, offering nothing but salt and grief. Their wounds gnawed at them, but hunger gnawed harder, dull ache that became a whisper, then a roar, an enemy as cruel as any monster. The sun glared overhead as the ship finally reached a lush island, fringed with flowers and soft green grass. A sweet wind drifted off the land, carrying the sound of lowing cattle. The men stared at the gentle beasts, grazing on gold-tipped meadows, a vision of comfort that mocked their suffering. Eurylochus, weary but shrewd, approached Odysseus. "Captain, the men need rest and shelter. Let us land, build fire, and recover our strength. I swear on my life we'll honor your warning and the words of Tiresias. We will not touch the sun god's sacred cattle." Odysseus, troubled, agreed with heavy reluctance. He made the men swear a solemn oath. "Touch not the golden cattle, nor lay a hand on their herds, or the wrath of Helios will destroy us all." The crew nodded, desperate for peace, but their promise was strained by hunger and sorrow. They gathered what little food the island offered, roots, berries, wild fish, but the bounty soon ran dry. For days, a strange calm held the ship fast, while black rain clouds stormed overhead, trapping the Greeks on the island's shore. As their stores dwindled, stomachs turned hollow and resolve weakened. At night, the men watched the sacred herds drift by, each beast a picture of plenty, each movement a fresh agony. Odysseus, knowing the danger, went apart to pray to the gods. Seeking strength, his heart heavy with the burdens no mortal could long endure. Exhausted, he fell into a deep sleep, unaware that hunger and desperation were forming a different kind of pact among his men. While their leaders slept, Eurylochus gathered the others by the fireside, his eyes wild with need. To die of hunger here, while these fat cattle graze before Zeus, this the fate the gods wish for proud Greeks. It is better to drown at sea than to waste away, unmourned and forgotten. If we must perish, let it be with full bellies and the strength to face our doom. Temptation proved too strong. With trembling hands, the men drove their knives into the sacred herd. The fires sizzled, and the island filled with the scent of roasted meat. The men feasted and, for a moment, their misery vanished. Yet, as the flames flickered, strange omens appeared. The hides on the fire crawled and bellowed. The meat itself lowed as if still alive, and the wind died to a perfect, eerie calm. When Odysseus awoke, the truth was plain, a feast of doom upon every face. His rage could do nothing now. The deed was finished, and fate was set in motion. No warning came in person, but thunder rolled across the shaking earth. Helios, the sun god, saw all from his flaming chariot. He raged in heaven and demanded justice from Zeus. "Strike them down, for they have killed what no man may touch. If you refuse, I shall descend to Hades and never light the world again." Zeus heeded the sun god. The black clouds roiled, and the wind returned with a scream. Odysseus ordered the men back aboard, hoping somehow to outrun the coming doom. As the ship cleared the island, lightning ripped the sky and split the mast in two. The sails tore, the hull shattered. One by one, Odysseus' starving men were swept into the boiling sea, calling his name until the thunder drowned them out. Helpless, Odysseus clung to a single fragment of wood, his ship destroyed, his friends lost, his oath to the gods in ruins. Fates and curses circled endlessly as the storm flung him far from all he loved and all he once commanded. Days later, battered and alone, he washed upon a nameless shore. The land was wild and strange, but the wind was soft as honey again, and the air hummed with strange life. All hope of returning with his crew was gone. Yet Odysseus, grieving, remembered Tiresias' words. The way home still existed for those with the strength to bear such loss and the cleverness to seize any chance, no matter how dim it seemed. From his lowest moment, hope glimmered again, a faint star, guiding the lonely king ever onward, toward unknown hands and unexpected salvation. Chapter 11. The Island of Calypso. Desperate, clinging to driftwood amid the endless foam, Odysseus was tossed for days by a vengeful sea. The gods themselves seemed to turn their faces away save for one. Athena, ever watchful, softened the waves beneath her favored hero, guiding him toward shore. Through briny mist, a strange land revealed itself, a forested island fragrant with myrtle and cedar, softer than any battlefield or storm-scarred cliff. Odysseus crawled to the sand, half dead and all alone. The world silent, save for the distant song of birds and the booming of surf against rock. He stumbled into the shadows of ancient trees, finally collapsing beneath a leafy arch. There, the cool hush of green surrounded him, and sleep gentle, empty claimed Odysseus, blotting out grief for a few precious hours. He was awakened by the lightest steppe-woman's, graceful and strong. Her hair shimmered like river gold, her eyes deeper than the wind-dark sea. This was Calypso, the immortal nymph, daughter of the Titan Atlas, mistress of Ogygia. For 7 years, she would be both jailer and gentle healer to the last survivor of Troy's warriors, prisoner of paradise. When Odysseus awoke, Calypso greeted him with kindness and wonder. She fed him with unheard-of fruits and sweet nectar, bathed his wounds, and brought him to her sun-soaked cave where violets bloomed and silver fountains sang. At first Odysseus ached for Ithaca with every heartbeat. He sat at the shore with tears in his eyes, staring west at the horizon, praying for a ship, a sign, an end to his exile. Calypso watched him with sympathy and quiet longing. "Why not stay with me?" she offered, her voice threaded with sadness. "Here you will never age, nor know pain. I will make you immortal. Forget your sorrow and let the past lie still." For a time, Calypso's beauty and kindness offered a gentle balm for Odysseus's broken heart. He told her stories in the firelit cave, his voice echoing against jewel-banded walls, of Troy's burning towers, of monsters and marvels, of the longing that haunted every hero. Calypso listened, her immortality weighing heavier with every tale, her own loneliness echoing his. Yet night after night, Odysseus returned to the shore. With each sunrise, his yearning grew sharper. For Penelope, her steadfast loyalty, for Telemachus, his son grown into manhood without a father's wisdom, for the stony slopes and olive trees of Ithaca, home not just by birth, but by soul. The gods intervene. Above the world, the gods watched in silence. But at last, Athena, tireless champion of Odysseus, pleaded with Zeus. "It is time. His suffering is enough. Let him go home, if it is his destiny." Zeus agreed, sending Hermes, swift-winged and bright, to Calypso's cave. The nymph met the messenger, with tears sparkling on her cheeks. "Why do the gods envy even humble mortals? Why must I release him, when I give him nothing but love and peace?" But Hermes was unyielding. "It is not for you to change fate. Let Odysseus return, this is the will of Olympus." With a heavy heart, Calypso found Odysseus by the shore. She spoke not of her sadness, but with a quiet dignity. "Build a raft, noble Odysseus. I will give you tools and timbers, and fill your stores with food and wine. Sail for home, if that is what your heart commands." She watched as he built a raft from fragrant pine, her eyes following every stroke, and not. When it was done, she helped load stores of sweet fruit, cool water, and fine cloth for a sail. At the final hour, standing together where foam met sand, Calypso pressed her hand to his heart. "Go with my blessing, but remember this island and the kindness we shared. Not all prisons are made of hate." Odysseus, moved by her generosity, struggled for words. "You have shown mercy when even men would not. You will not be forgotten." He set forth upon the open sea again, a lone figure on a fragile raft, the vastness of the world pressing in on every side. The waves rolled beneath him, wild but alive with purpose, as though the very gods, not just fate, were guiding him home at last. Ahead waited more challenges, for Poseidon, god of sea and tempest, would not so easily forgive the blinding of his son, the Cyclops. But for one day, one starlit night, Odysseus traveled under open sky, hope burning anew. The song of Ithaca like a beacon in the darkness. Chapter 12. The Return to Ithaca. Alone upon his raft, Odysseus faced the endless blue, prayed for the mercy of uncertain winds, and braced himself for the last and hardest leg of his journey. For days his raft bobbed and skimmed across the waves, driven by the gods, guided by hope, yet shadowed always by Poseidon's wrath. When at last the green hills of an unknown land crept over the horizon, hope flickered in Odysseus' weary heart. But Poseidon, returning from distant lands, saw his old enemy so near to home. With a shout that shook Olympus, the god raised his trident and unleashed a storm fierce enough to shatter mountains. Winds shrieked, black clouds blotted out the sun, and endless waves tossed Odysseus like driftwood. His raft was smashed to pieces, tossed upon jagged rocks. Still, the willful hero clung to fragments of timber, battered and breathless, until the storm, sated, let him tumble at last onto a new shore. When Odysseus awoke, face buried in warm sand, he found himself not in Ithaca, but in the kingdom of the Phaeacians, people favored by the gods for their gentle hearts and love of the sea. The Phaeacians, last refuge, Queen Arete, and King Alcinous greeted Odysseus with open arms, marveling at his tale of suffering and endurance. The Phaeacians nursed him, clothed him, and filled their halls with music, dancing, and feasting. Before their court, Odysseus at last unburdened himself of the full story, his journey from Troy, the monsters, the dead, the sorrows and sins, and the haunting memory of home. The king's brow furrowed with compassion and awe. "No greater ordeal have I ever heard," he declared. "It would shame the gods to keep you homeless any longer. You shall not be denied your return." The Phaeacians' swiftest ship was made ready that very evening. Odysseus stepped aboard as an honored guest, arms laden with gifts-woven robes, shining bronze, rare spices, and a storied cup of purest gold. Most precious of all was their promise: safe passage home, sleeping undisturbed upon soft purple blankets as rowers drove him quietly across the moonlit sea. The shores of Ithaca, as dawn broke, the Phaeacian ship slid silently into a hidden cove beneath Ithaca's misty cliffs. Still asleep, Odysseus was carried gently to the shore and left in the shade of olive trees, lands that had haunted his dreams for 20 years. When he awakened, at first confusion reigned. He stared at the familiar stones and roots, convinced it might be another trick, another phantom island. But Athena came to him, her eyes fierce with delight. "This is your homeland, Odysseus. After so many trials, fate has finally brought you home. Yet danger does not sleep. You must be as clever as you are brave. Suitors fill your halls, devouring your fortune, seeking your queen's hand, and plotting your son's death. Caution and patience will win back what is yours." At Athena's touch, Odysseus was transformed, his hair grayed, his back bent, his clothes ragged and filthy. He looked every bit the beggar, a stranger in his own kingdom, beggar in his own hall. Moving quietly through groves and goat paths, Odysseus made his way to the humble hut of Immerse, his loyal swineherd, who treated the old beggar with. It was here, by Athena's grace, that son and father, the weary king and young Telemachus, were finally reunited. At first, Telemachus could not believe it was truly Odysseus, but a shining glance from Athena dispelled all doubt. Tearful joy filled the little hut as they embraced the lives of father and son, divided so long, knitted back together in a single powerful moment. Together, with Eumaeus' help, they wove a plan to reclaim Ithaca. Patience would be their weapon, justice their shield, the queen's endurance. Meanwhile, in the palace halls, proud Penelope still held suitors at bay. For years, she spun and unspun her burial shroud by night, claiming she could not choose a new husband until it was finished, her cleverness stalling, her hope barely holding. Telemachus' return stoked rumors and danger. The suitors grew suspicious and impatient. Little did they know, all the fates of Ithaca, all the tangled threads of vengeance and love, were about to snap together. Odysseus, battered yet not broken, took slow steps through fields he had not seen in decades, preparing to face the last of his trials at home. Reason and cunning were now his sharpest blades. And so, after years at sea, landfall was only the beginning. Homecoming would demand not just strength and luck, but every ounce of guile and courage, for which Odysseus' name would be remembered. Chapter 13. The Battle in the Hall. Vengeance and Reunion. For days, Odysseus dwelled in Shadowsking, stripped of his crown, clothed as a beggar, watching his own palace through the wary eyes of a hunted man. Guided by Athena's wisdom, he measured every word and feigned every limp, testing the hearts of servants and the cruelty of the suitors who had feasted in his absence. Their laughter was sharp, their insults sharper, and every loaf and goblet they stole from his table deepened his resolve. Penelope, radiant but weary, felt a strange ripple of hope. Dreams and omens swirled around her. She welcomed the wandering beggar with quiet courtesy, moved by something in his gaze that sparked long-suppressed memories. Yet the suitors taunted him, striking him with footstools, daring the gods to intervene. Among them, only a handful of servants remembered kindness. Eumaeus, the swineherd, and old nurse, Eurycleia, whose trembling hands would soon reveal more than she dared imagine. All the while, Telemachus and Odysseus prepared. They counted loyal arms in quiet corners, hid away sharp swords and shields behind storerooms and doors, and watched the daily rhythms of men who thought themselves untouchable. Penelope's last challenge. Knowing she could stall no longer, Penelope finally spoke to the suitors. "If you wish my hand, you must prove yourselves. Here is Odysseus' great bownon, but he could bend it." She placed the weapon before the assembly, its horn and sinew glinting in the torchlight. "String this bow, and send an arrow clean through the rings of 12 axes. Whomever succeeds, I will wed." The challenge was met with frowns and boasts. One by one, each arrogant suitor tried his hand, but the bow was stubborn as a god. Not a single man could budge the string, let alone notch it or fire a shot. Sweat beaded brows. Pride turned to panic. At last, the beggar hobbled forward, voice quiet, yet full of ancient promise. "Let me try." Gurrs erupted. "Let the old man have his play." But Penelope, moved by a mysterious trust, allowed it. To their astonishment, the beggar, her Odysseus in disguise, handled the bow with reverence, caressing what he'd once known by heart. With ease, he bent and strung it, drawing the string to his ear. He sighted down the shaft and loosed. The arrow hummed, whistling through all 12 axe heads in a single breathless instant. Silence crashed over the room. Time seemed to halt, the air tight with fate, the reckoning. In that stillness, Odysseus straightened. Athena's light glimmered in his eyes. With Telemachus at his side and loyal servants armed with hidden blades, he let his disguise fall away. Dogs, you have squandered my wealth, shamed my house, and plotted to steal my wife and son. Now judgment comes as swift and sharp as this arrow. Another shot flew, piercing the throat of the suitors' cruelest ringleader, and panic broke loose. Battle erupted in the great hall, tables overturned, wine puddling like blood, howls of fear and outrage echoing off the high-pitched walls. Suitors grabbed swords and shields, but fell beneath the fury of a king scorned, his wrath honed by years of loss and yearning. Telemachus fought at his father's side, a man grown at last. Eumaeus and others, true in heart, sealed the doors and ensured that none escaped. It was a slaughter harsh but just, every blow echoing the agony of long exile and the betrayal of home. When the last traitorous voice was silent, Odysseus stood, ragged and bloodied, but kingly once more. For a moment, it seemed as though all of Ithaca held its breath, waiting for the next turning of fate. Recognition and forgiveness. In the ruined hall, Odysseus summoned the old nurse Euryclea to help clean away the blood and bodies. As she bent to wash his feet, her hands stopped a scar. An ancient wound from a boar's tusk revealed the truth at last. My child, my king, she sobbed, tears of joy streaming down her wrinkled face. But it was Penelope whose heart most needed convincing. She faced Odysseus across the empty hall, her gaze searching and proud. Would a stranger dare claim her husband's place? With careful words, Odysseus described their marriage bed built around the living heart of an ancient olive tree, roots and all. No other soul living had ever seen its secret construction. At last, Penelope's pride melted, joy and grief rushing together, and she embraced him. Husband and wife, lost to each other and the world for 20 years, at last were truly reunited. Telemachus knelt before his father, weeping not as a child lost, but as a man who had finally come home. Together, they lit new fires in battered hearths, restoring peace where chaos had ruled. Ithaca would heal. The king had returned. The story of Odysseus, patient, clever, undaunted, would live wherever courage faces loss and finds a way home. Epilogue, the legacy of Odysseus. Peace returned to Ithaca like the gentle return of dawn after storm. The great hall, once stained with blood and echoing with challenge, was cleaned and made new. The laughter of workers and children soon chasing out the shadows. The land and its people, ravaged by neglect and consumed by fear, found hope and strength in the steadfast rule of a king returned from the edge of myth. A kingdom restored. Odysseus, at last, seated on his ancestral throne, looked out over fields he once feared he would never see again. He watched Penelope, wise and beautiful, moving with quiet authority through the hall, weaving order and mercy into every task. At his side stood Telemachus, no longer a child, but now a capable prince, hardened by sorrow, but sharpened by love and loyalty. With the suitors gone, families reunited. Old wounds began to heal. The king did not forget those lost along the journey, valiant rowers, loyal friends, and even foes whose deaths weighed upon his conscience. He offered sacrifices to the gods and raised songs and stories in their names, so that none would fade quietly into the night. Still, Odysseus remained wary, bearing the wisdom won at such a terrible price. Not all hearts were immediately mended. Some families mourned lost sons. Some eyes watched him with suspicion, wondering how any mortal could have wandered so far and returned so changed. But wisdom became his greatest tool. He traveled among his people, speaking with peasants and nobles alike, judging fairly, encouraging the fearful, and rewarding the steadfast. Tales of his journey spread to distant islands, stories of cleverness and endurance, winning out over brute force alone. Athena watched over him still, not always with miracles, but with quiet guidance, invisible to mortal eyes. In moments of doubt, he felt her wisdom steadying his hand and quickening his mind. The fulfillment of prophecy. One prophecy remained. The words of Tiresias, the blind prophet met among the dead, echoed in Odysseus' ears. When you see men who know nothing of the sea and mistake an oar for a winnowing fan, plant your oar in the earth and sacrifice to Poseidon. There, your journey will truly end. After years of peace, Odysseus set out once more. This time, not as a wanderer chased by storms, but as a pilgrim carrying the light. He traveled inland, past olive groves and high green hills, until he found men harvesting grain who had never seen a ship or heard the word, or, as prophecy required, he drove his weathered paddle deep into the earth and offered gifts and prayers to the Lord of Waters, asking forgiveness and balance between land and sea. With this final act, Odysseus laid to rest all curses and wrath. He returned once more to Ithaca, his wars all ended outwardly and within. The lessons of the Odyssey. The world changed during his long absence. Some wounds would never fully heal. Others grew into marks of wisdom. Odysseus grew old, not with bitterness, but with gratitude and patience. He saw the seeds of peace he had planted bear fruit as his people grew strong and storied, passing on his adventures to sons and daughters for generations. The Odyssey remained not just the story of his journey home, but a living lesson for all time. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to move forward despite it. Home is not only a place, but a bond of love, memory, and loyalty. Cleverness and kindness are greater strengths than swords or ships. Endurance, in the face of grief or impossible odds, is where true greatness lies. The name of Odysseus, the man of twists and turns, echoed far beyond his island, carried in the songs of bards and the whispers of storytellers. His tale became a touchstone for wanderers and dreamers everywhere, a hope that even the longest journey may find its end, and every lost heart may one day return. Final homecoming. At last, Odysseus grew old beside Penelope, surrounded by friends and family. The olive tree that had once formed the heart of their secret bed now cast deep, cool shadows over a new generation of Ithacans playing in the long grass. The storms which had once threatened to consume him were nothing but memories, tamed by time and retold as legend. And so, the story of Odysseus ends not with a final voyage, but with the most precious gift, the peace of home, won by wit, endurance, and unyielding hope. End of the Odyssey. Thank you for sharing this journey.